Hey guys, welcome to the HVAC Diaries. Today is Friday, November 10th, and this is my weekly HVAC vlog brought to you by New Calgon. By the time you're watching this, I will be across the country on my way to meet up with a bunch of New Calgon representatives from across the country. So I'm excited to bring that vlog to you very soon. How are you guys? Did you have a good week? I've spent the last 7 days fighting off a really mild head cold. Actually, I wouldn't even call it a cold. I would call it more of like a threaten of a cold. So I could be a lot worse off than I have been. But it's vlog time, so are you ready for some HVAC adventures? Our week started off in the most beautiful, fancy Pilates studio.
But it comes back quite fast as well.
They have 2 water source heat pump units in there that we needed to look at. One of them is right by the reception desk, and it's very noisy. And the other one is inside their actual studio, and that one is just not working. Unfortunately, the noisy unit has got a really old compressor in it. The unit's about 13 years old, and it's an R22 system, and the motor just seems to be on its way out. So the solution to fix it is to replace the unit. However, they've just finished a tenant improvement in there. The Pilates studio's only been there for 3 weeks. It's like brand new. And they've done some really fancy construction. Well, it looks fairly simple, like it's just like a square box, but they've put a lot of work into this place. And again, they've only been there for 3 weeks. So when we told them that we needed to replace the unit, and in order to even access the unit, we're gonna have to like go into their bulkhead and there's gonna be a bit of construction involved, they were like, what? We just moved in. And so they say to us, this unit's been making a noise since the day we moved in. It's always just made this noise. And he's like, our receptionist is having trouble even hearing people on the phone when they call in. So this is kind of a big problem. Oh. Anyway, so we're gonna figure out if we're gonna replace that guy or not. The other unit in their big studio space, that's not working because of a dead transformer. However, we're just about to start like getting into it, and they're like, we have a class now, so can you leave? Can you come back in an hour? So we're gonna go back there probably next week with a new transformer when they don't have a class. But you guys, oh my goodness, it is so fancy there. It is so pretty. Even the free weights they have in their little, they're so beautiful and bougie, and oh my goodness.
A latte, my favorite.
So the maintenance guy there tells us that it's about $45 a class. Okay. But I still want to go and try it. I've never done a Pilates class before, so I think it'd be cool to give that a go. But $45 is kind of expensive. We looked at an ice machine this week for the first time. It's actually kind of cool. We've done some work for a coffee shop, like a franchise, and apparently they've got like a group chat where they'll ask for advice from each other and stuff. And so the guy was like, I'm looking for a reliable refrigeration technician, and the one guy we've done work for is like, oh, call Camcool, they're a great team. So he called us up and he's like, hey, my ice machine's not working, can you come take a look at it? And yes, we did. And we found a few things. So number one was that there was no supply water. We turned the system on just to kind of see what it would do, and there was no water at all. So we go to the supply valve, and it's this little like valve that it's the very, very back of a cupboard that is so long. The cupboard is so long. I had my neck in there. I couldn't even reach it. My dad had to go in there with his long arms and turn it. But the thing is, they store their plastic cups in there. So every time they shove a sleeve of cups in there, it turns the valve ever so slightly, maybe like a quarter turn and a quarter turn. And every time they shove the cups in there, it turns a little bit more, and they shove the cups in there and it turns and turns and turns and turns until it's closed and there's no water coming out. So that was problem number 1. Problem number 2 is that they've removed the cover, like the guard on the bottom. In the cover, on the left-hand side is a filter, and on the right-hand side, it's like free-flowing. Because what I learned this week was those condenser fan motors actually blow instead of suck. Usually on a condenser coil, you'll see like a blanket of dirt on the front of it because the motor sucks in. But in this case, the motor blows out. So it sucks in dirt from this side, it gets stuck on the inside of the condenser coil. So when you look at the coil, it's like, oh, that's a clean coil, there's nothing on it. But if you go behind, like in front of the blade, it's a massive blanket. So we tell the guy, we're like, oh, you're just missing the front cover and stuff. And he's like, oh no, people keep kicking it and it keeps getting broken and stuff. So we just took it away. We're like, no, you're gonna need that. So anyway, so we found these 2 problems out. And because this is an ice machine we've never looked at before, we decided to run it through a cycle and see what it did. So our first test batch, it doesn't harvest. It makes ice and it runs for about 35 minutes because that's usually the first batch run time. But then it never harvested, like the ice just sits there. And so we lifted the little lid, and the ice thickness sensor is actually stuck against the ice. I actually have the ice sensor thickener right here, so I can show you. So this is the ice thickness sensor. This is what it looks like, and it sits on the evaporator coil. It just sits there, and water will trickle into the evaporator, and as the ice forms, the water will trickle further and further out of that evaporator plate until the water is trickling right on to this little screw, and that's kind of like your sensor. Once the water is trickling over that, instead of over here making the ice, because the ice is formed, it's now trickling right here. That's when it sends the signal to the board and it says, okay, we're done freezing, time to harvest, let's go. But that wasn't happening. What was happening was that ice would form right into this, and then we'd have to pry it off because it was stuck in ice. Okay, so we have a faulty ice thickness sensor. But it sucks because every time you do something or make an adjustment or whatever, you have to wait 35 minutes before you realize that it worked or if it didn't work. So troubleshooting an ice machine takes so much time. It's not frustrating at all. Not at all. Anyway, so we returned the next day and we disassembled the unit. It's actually pretty easy. It looks intimidating, but it is not. You just have to take the bin off of the unit. And to do that, I'll tell you, there's 2 thumb screws on the front, on the bottom, and there's 1 thumb screw on the back, on the top, on the left-hand side. There's not one on the right-hand side. Don't go looking for a 4th one. There's just those 3. So you undo those. And I think there's 2 holding the lid as well. Anyway, then the whole bin comes off, and then you can get to the brains and the heart of the unit, which is on the bottom. So we did that and we traced out the ice thickness sensor, and this is what we found. And we have evidence of other wires in there as well being cut like that. And so we think we have a friendly mouse. Because if you see that break, we also have a little break here. And there was another one too. Anyway, there's a few different breaks on this line. And so we think we have a little mouse friend over there. So with the ice thickness sensor replaced, our test batch came out beautifully. Keep going. Push, push, push. Come on, baby. But if you've ever worked in any kind of fast food place like that, it is so uncomfortable because you're literally sitting or sometimes lying on this kitchen floor where people are still working. Like the staff are still doing their jobs and they just have to get this and they just have to reach over you here and they're just pouring hot water like right above you. Don't move. Hopefully they don't mess it on you. It is really rough. So everyone is just in the same space and it's really rough. So we asked them, we're like, is there a better time to come? And they're like, we're busy from 5 a.m. until 8 p.m. So pick a time. We did go back to that gas station job that I spoke about in last week's vlog with all of those components up there. That's just like a component graveyard and contaminants in his system and everything. Well, what we did there last week only worked for like 4 days. No kidding. He's got a lot of problems there. So he called us back and he was like, pretty insistent on us changing the filter dryer only. And so we're like, you have contaminated refrigerant. And he's like, yeah, the filter dryer will take care of that. No, probably not. But sometimes it's very difficult to draw the line between being a technician and being a business owner. Because if the customer is only willing to pay for a certain thing where he thinks that he knows that thing. So my dad replaced the filter dryer with a much larger one. So that maybe it'll catch those contaminants, but probably not. When we were doing our vacuum of the system, there was just so much evidence of moisture, and it actually turned our vacuum pump oil, it turned it into some like milky white color. Which again is indication of moisture in the system. But anyway, so he had us change the filter dryer. And then as we're doing like more investigation, my dad, he notices that there's a little baggie on the side. It's like put in with a nice screw and everything with the TXV orifice. Now this orifice is like, it's like a little fitting with a tiny little hole in the middle. That's the orifice. This tiny little orifice, it has to go right inside here. And it's very specific to the refrigerant that you use. So if you replace the TXV on a certain system, you have to replace that little orifice inside as well. But because the bag was sitting right there, my dad's like, I don't think whoever replaced the TXV, and there's TXVs upstairs, like 2 or 3 of them, so they have been replaced. didn't replace the orifice. And so in order to replace that orifice, it's again another big job. You got to remove all the refrigerant. You've got to basically weld the valve out to check if there's that orifice in there. Anyway, so it seems like there's more problems there than we figured out before. He's still got moisture in his system, the contaminants, and now he's missing the orifice. And every time we speak to him and we ask him these questions, he seems to not really want to say what happened. He keeps saying no one's worked on it, no one's done anything. Dude, the evidence is right there. And if you just tell us what happened, what somebody did to your system, we can help you better. He's just not telling us the full story, and we're questioning why.
The guy is pretty adamant that this thing has worked for the last 4 or 5 years without that orifice, so he thinks it does not need it.
Sometimes in our industry, you can have a problem from installation that your system will run for 3 or 4 years until it shows signs of a problem, and you can trace that problem back to the installation. And so with this guy, he's like, well, it's been working for the last 3 years, no one's touched it, so he says, I don't know, why is it giving a problem now? And it's just so hard to explain to somebody that a system can work for quite some time before it shows signs of problems that can be traced back to like 3 or 4 years ago. It's so crazy. This industry it fascinates me. The last story I have for you this week is a rooftop unit at the packaging company that we work for. They've got this one room, it's called the HP room, and there's a massive HP printing machine in there, and it's got to be kept in its own kind of environment climate. So there's 2 7.5-ton rooftop units that serve that little space. And one of them was tripping the breaker immediately. So my dad and I went up there. Oh my gosh, it was so windy that day. It was frigid cold wind. And we started testing things. So because it was tripping the breaker immediately, we started by testing the compressors, make sure that they ohmed out okay. We used our little megger to make sure that it was okay. We also checked the crankcase heaters. We checked the evaporator, the blower motor, we checked everything. And we traced the fault to some burnt wires on the condenser fan. We ordered a new fan motor and replaced that the next day. Day that it was so windy, I was just in the worst mood. I had the worst day because we started on that windy rooftop, and I would rather spend a full day in the rain than any time in the wind. The rain is a little bit miserable. The wind makes me angry.
It is so windy up here today. It is putting me in the worst mood possible.
So I was so angry for that job. And then I was pissed off because my dad sent me down and I just had to go and find one little female connector, like this little bug. All I needed was that. None in our truck. I looked in every single bits box we had. We had all the male connectors we needed. Not a single female connector. So that really got under my skin. That made me really annoyed. Then we went to go and see that ice machine that, well, at the time we couldn't figure out what was happening. Not really figure out, it was just frustrating waiting the 35 minutes every time. It was just sitting there for a very long time, so that made me annoyed.
Waiting for the first batch of ice to harvest after you've made a change is like watching a pot boil.
And then I had to go to supplier training that evening. And we were stuck in North Vancouver, which I've spoken about before. It's just notoriously difficult with traffic to get on and off that North Shore. So I was stressing out about getting to a supplier training on time after leaving North Van, and I was rushing. And then on my way to the supplier training, they called me and they were like, actually it's canceled because we have a power outage. And initially I was like, perfect, I'll just turn around and go home, but I couldn't because we had ordered a motor, and because I was going there for training, I was like, I'll just pick it up at that time anyway. But because training was canceled, they ended up putting the motor in the bushes so I could go and pick it up. So I still had to drive all the way there in the pouring rain. So, such a bad mood. All right, guys, that's all the stories I have for you this week. I am very excited for this coming weekend. I am heading to Florida, and I'm going to take you along with me. So get excited for a trip. I'm also thinking of changing up the format of my vlog just a little bit because I feel like they're just sometimes getting really long. And I don't know if you guys are enjoying sitting for 28 minutes watching a vlog. Maybe you are, and I'd love to hear if you are or if you're not. But I'm thinking of when I have a more in-depth story is to mention them in the vlog for the week, but then break those stories out into individual videos. So for example, today I would have spoken about the ice machine in a very vague way, but then I would do a video on that ice machine and post it later in the week. What do you guys think? Do you like everything together in one vlog? Or do you think I should separate them out a little bit? Because I think it might be easier to digest shorter videos, maybe? I'm not sure, I'm just kind of thinking about different things. All right, guys, I will leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the HVAC Diaries HVAC vlog. I apologize for my voice. It sounds like it's been a little bit crackly this time. I can feel coughs right there. But hopefully next week I will be rid of this. And yeah, are you guys excited to go to Florida with me? Are you excited? All right, guys, have a good week.